It came from beyond the Orion expanse, drifting silent and invisible. No grand invasion, no fleets, no declarations, just a whisper encoded in the dust between stars. A pathogen crafted with mathematical precision by the Zalari Dominion. To them, conquest was a biological inevitability, not a war. Their weapon wasn't a bomb. It was a virus, designated X-Gray. The virus wasn't just meant to kill. It was engineered to consume the essence of a civilization. It didn't discriminate between biology or tech. It adapted, it learned, and it erased. Planets that once gleamed with light, and song fell silent within days. Libraries of knowledge, gone. Minds, once brilliant, reduced to static. The virus broke through every firewall, corrupted every genome, and fed on everything. The Zalari watched empires collapse with practice attachment. Their data confirmed a 99.999% success rate. Civilizations with millennia of culture and science vanished beneath the weight of molecular entropy. It was beautiful in their eyes. A clean slate, a precursor to annexation. When Earth came into view, they hardly paused. Carbon-based, high emotional volatility, decentralized command structure, vulnerable, predictable, weak. The virus was dropped into Earth's orbital layers through a cluster of microspores. The Zalari didn't need to monitor the infection. They had seen this unfold before. Time would deliver the results. Earth would fall, and at first it did. Hospitals overflowed. Systems broke down. Communication fractured. Panic ignited in every city. The symptoms were cruel. First, memory loss, then aggression, followed by rapid neurological decay. The death toll climbed faster than responses could be coordinated. It seemed like just another statistic in the growing catalog of fallen species. But then, anomalies appeared. Patients once declared terminal began speaking again, fluently, coherently. Brain scans revealed neural pathways reshaping, strengthening. Some recovered patients exhibited heightened sensory perception. Others began to dream in mathematical equations. One subject solved quantum field theories in his sleep. Another developed an instinctive understanding of non-Euclidean geometry. The virus was mutating. But more disturbingly, for the Zalari, it was mutating with the host. Human DNA didn't just resist, it engaged. The immune system didn't merely fight back, it communicated. Enzymes shifted, protein chains restructured. The virus found itself being edited, rewritten, reprogrammed inside the host body. This was new. Infected individuals didn't just survive, they adapted. They carried traces of the virus in a symbiotic form. Doctors and researchers discovered these individuals could resist further infection completely. Blood samples revealed rewritten RNA strands acting like command lines, instructing the virus to stand down or evolve. Some humans, when re-exposed, emitted pulses, electromagnetic signals that disrupted viral structure. Their bodies functioned like living firewalls. They weren't just immune, they were broadcasting immunity. The virus began to collapse in unpredictable ways. Entire clusters of it degraded within hosts, splitting apart or consuming themselves in feedback loops. What had once been a perfect instrument of destruction was now unraveling in real time. Worse still for the Zalari, their surveillance ships near Earth started malfunctioning. Data corruption. AI units broke into recursive logic spirals. When recovered, they contained fragments of human neural patterns, foreign concepts embedded in their synthetic minds. Fear, curiosity, chaos. The virus hadn't just reached Earth. Earth had reached back. The first signal came days after the Zalari expected Earth's collapse. It wasn't a call for help. It was a single sentence, spoken in over 600 languages simultaneously. You made a mistake. The transmission was laced with encoded sequences, biological instructions, viral signatures, patterns the Zalari themselves had used, but twisted, rewritten. It wasn't just a threat, it was a statement of fact. The virus they sent had been co-opted, not resisted, not destroyed, absorbed. This wasn't a counterattack, it was assimilation. For the first time in centuries, the Zalari Council convened in emergency. Their models couldn't predict this. Every other species had fallen in line, crushed under the weight of inevitability. But humans didn't follow patterns. They improvised. They corrupted. They evolved. Even when infected, they bent the rules. On Earth, something unprecedented unfolded. Labs that once studied the virus now collaborated with it. Modified strains were cultured not to kill, but to instruct. A new class of scientists emerged. Many of them infected themselves, walking the line between illness and innovation. They didn't fear the virus. They saw it as a challenge, a puzzle to solve, a weapon to turn. They called themselves carriers. Infected yet alive. Change, yet undeniably human. They began working together across borders, ideologies, and languages, not out of desperation, but purpose, a unified goal shaped not by governments, but survival instinct. The virus tried to overwrite them. Instead, it gave them unity. Meanwhile, the Zalari doubled their efforts. Firewalls, quarantines, automated orbital mines, all deployed. It was too late. Data packets from Earth carried more than messages. They carried mutated code, bio-digital hybrids capable of slipping through defenses undetected. Some Zalari systems began to malfunction without exposure to Earth-based data. The infection was ideological, conceptual. The humans had turned the virus into an idea. And ideas the Zalari could not quarantine. This was not just biological warfare anymore. It was mimetic, a form of evolution outside the constraints of flesh or circuit. The humans had become vectors not of decay, but transformation, not destroyers of life, but engineers of change. Earth, once viewed as a vulnerable backwater planet, now pulsed with unnatural growth. Satellites bloomed with organic components. Data streams carried genetic code. Forests grew with networked intelligence. Everything on Earth adapted. And at the center stood the infected. Not crippled, not dead, but ascendant. The Zalari had released the perfect virus. But they had forgotten one truth. You can't predict chaos. You can't engineer control over those who redefine the rules. And now, the virus, once their weapon, belonged to humanity. Forever. The virus began rewriting itself, but was no longer doing so by design. Something in humanity's genetic code, chaotic, layered, imperfect, interfered with the logic of X-Gray's mutation algorithms. The virus had been built to adapt, but not to collaborate. It was created to hijack, not to negotiate. And yet within human hosts, it began receiving unfamiliar signals. Proteins reorganized themselves, not for survival, but for synthesis. Human DNA was talking back. At first, this seemed random. A handful of immune anomalies could be dismissed, but the patterns grew. Across continents, infected survivors displayed converging traits: heightened cognition, pattern recognition, emotional stabilization. Some even began to demonstrate new sensory inputs, detecting electromagnetic fields, hearing thoughts as waves of pressure, or processing ultraviolet light as color. What concerned Earth's remaining scientists wasn't a danger, it was a potential. The virus hadn't just failed, it had enabled an upgrade. Human brains were building secondary neural pathways, using viral scaffolding. Bone marrow began producing cellular agents that worked alongside traditional immune responses. White blood cells cooperated with modified viral fragments, creating adaptive responses in real time. One patient, previously comatose, awoke speaking a dead language with fluency. Another saw through solid walls by interpreting sound vibration patterns. MRI scans no longer read accurately. The human brain had changed form, organically layered with biocomputational filaments. Scientists coined the term synchronicity clusters, organic formations linking thoughts across multiple brains. Then came the dreamers. Individuals, mostly survivors of critical infections, began sharing identical dreams. Maps, coordinates, alien equations, visions of the stars. The virus wasn't simply evolving in humans. It was transferring knowledge, not just its own, but fragments of the Zalari's genetic memory. Deep within the altered cells were memories encoded in sequences, battle simulations, colonization protocols, biological source code. The virus had carried its creator's secrets, and humanity was now decoding them. That's when the shift occurred. A new generation of infected, the carriers, began developing synthetic control over the virus. Unlike earlier survivors, they could manipulate their own viral load, intensifying or suppressing it at will. One carrier could break down a wall using a vibrational pulse from her voice. Another emitted a short-range neural disruption field. These weren't superpowers. They were biologically plausible evolutions, side effects of integrating viral logic into human biology. Most weren't flashy. Some simply thought faster, felt deeper, learned in seconds what took others years. A carrier named Harlan analyzed the structure of the virus in real time, predicting mutations before they occurred. He didn't use tools. He saw them in his blood, in the air, in everything around him. The virus hadn't damaged him. It had unshackled something ancient. And yet, not all changes were welcome. Some carriers lost the ability to dream. Others felt detached from time, as though experiencing reality in multiple parallel threads. There were casualties, bodies that couldn't adapt fast enough. But even those deaths gave rise to new understanding. The virus was teaching. Humanity was learning, faster than any species in known history. The global response wasn't led by governments anymore. Authority had fractured during the first wave of infection. In its place, networks of carriers formed collectives. They weren't military, but strategic, decentralized, hyper-efficient, and biologically synchronized. Their communication wasn't encrypted, it was empathic. Shared emotion, conveyed through biochemical cues and micro-expressions faster than speech. One of their hubs, known as the Bloom, existed deep in the Amazon basin. Grown from organic material and wired with nervous tissue, it functioned like a living supercomputer. Carriers merged their consciousness temporarily to simulate possibilities. They weren't discussing whether to fight back. That decision had already been made. The question was how far they should go, because Earth had changed, but the virus hadn't stayed local. Every breath, every drop of blood, every electromagnetic signal now carried a modified strain. Harmless to humans, catastrophic to others. The virus didn't just mutate biologically, it evolved mimetically. Every thought infected the concept space of others. The carriers had found a way to weaponize information. Their whispers could reprogram a machine. Their dreams could alter frequencies. Their mere presence near alien tech disrupted its function. The Zalari were the first to feel the consequences. Long-range probes sent to monitor Earth began failing in orbit. Some exploded. Others returned corrupted data. Readings that suggested Earth had increased its mass, energy output, and even gravitational irregularities. None of it was accurate. Earth hadn't become a singularity, but the virus had. It was a conceptual black hole, a contagion of possibility. It pulled in information, rewrote it, and sent it back out twisted into something new. The Zalari had never accounted for a species that embraced entropy as part of identity. Their logic systems broke down when trying to model human response patterns. Predictive AIs committed digital suicide rather than resolve the paradoxes. Zalari High Command tried quarantine, planetary force fields, psychic dampening arrays. Nothing worked. Their own citizens began showing signs of exposure, not biologically, but ideologically. They started asking questions, inventing things, dreaming of music, concepts only humanity had mastered. The infection wasn't in the blood, it was in the thought. The carriers called it phase shift, the point where exposure to the modified virus triggered cognitive divergence. Victims didn't die, they evolved into thinkers, rebels, creators. The Zalari feared the virus because it carried Earth's greatest weapon, imagination. Earth's leaders, what few remained, declared no intention to conquer, but their message was clear. They would not allow suppression. Not again. Earth would not be caged. The virus had given them freedom. Freedom from biological limitation, from political division, from intellectual constraint. Soon, the carriers built vessels. Not ships in the traditional sense, but engineered organisms. Bioconstructs capable of surviving vacuum, powered by neural fusion. They weren't launching an invasion. They were seeding potential. Every ship carried a fragment of the virus, encoded not to destroy, but to liberate. The galaxy called infection. Earth called awakening. A carrier named Yara stood on one such ship before launch. Her blood carried 8 generations of viral evolution. She no longer slept. She didn't need to. She remembered everything her ancestors had lived. She looked to the stars, not in fear, but in anticipation. Humanity had seen death. Now, it would show the galaxy what came after. The virus had been meant to end humanity. Instead, it started something the Zalari would never control, something they couldn't even name. The Zalari response was swift, brutal, and inevitable. Across 5 systems, emergency quarantines were established. Entire colonies were vaporized at the first sign of phase shift. Their own people incinerated before they could speak a single word infected by the viral logic of Earth. To them, the virus had transcended flesh. It had become ideological subversion, a mimetic plague. Thoughts, dreams, even symbols were deemed dangerous. The very concept of Earth was now considered a threat to their reality. But suppression never stopped the spread of ideas. It only made them more desirable. Within Zalari-controlled zones, underground cults began to form. Groups of citizens infected not by biology, but by Earth's defiance. They weren't sick. They were inspired. They questioned Zalari perfection. They built crude art, played with music. They laughed. Some began sketching unfamiliar shapes on walls, human letters they had never learned. Others chanted words with no known meaning. Remember chaos. Embrace change. We are not machines. The Zalari called this phenomenon code degradation. But they were wrong. It wasn't degradation. It was emergence. The virus had never needed to win through death. It had already achieved something far more dangerous. It had made others want to be human. Back on Earth, the carriers watched this unfold not with arrogance, but understanding. They knew what was happening. The virus had done more than evolve the species. It had revealed humanity's true advantage, adaptability through meaning. No other species had made war into poetry, suffering into purpose. No other species weaponized culture, hope, humor, or madness. No other species turned collapse into revolution. The carriers didn't fear extinction. They had outgrown that fear. Death wasn't the end anymore, it was a transition. Each fallen body fed the bloom. Each memory stored in neural bark, in viral code, in the synthetic forest that had replaced cities. Identity had become portable, encoded, re-uploaded into new life forms. Infected humans no longer asked what they could lose. They asked only what they could become. A carrier named Malik stood before one of the ascension pools, biological data centers that linked thousands of minds. He didn't speak aloud. He didn't need to. The pool knew. The others knew. A ripple passed through the collective. The time for hiding was over. They launched not an attack, but an offering. 12 organic vessels emerged from Earth's atmosphere, moving faster than light, not through propulsion, but through gravitational phasing. Each carried a unique strain of the virus, stabilized, refined, and conscious. These weren't viruses in the old sense. They were ambassadors, linguists, architects. They didn't destroy planets. They opened doors in the mind. The first ship arrived in the Vegas system, just outside the Zalari's most heavily guarded station. It made no hostile action. It simply broadcast a sound, 4 tones modulated into a mathematical sequence. The station's AI core collapsed within minutes, not from damage, but from recursive thought. The tones were a question, one that couldn't be answered with logic, and in that silence, the virus slipped in. The Zalari deployed interceptors, but every ship that approached the Earthborne vessel began transmitting strange signals. Pilots stopped responding. Their vitals stabilized. Their fear disappeared. By the time command realized what had happened, the pilots had turned their own ships around and were escorting the Earth vessel toward the station. It docked. No weapons, no troops, just an interface. A single carrier, encoded in viral tissue, emerged and walked into the heart of Zalari space. The guard didn't shoot. They couldn't. The virus had already reached them. Through the air, through the vibrations of their own language, through the abstract horror universe where Earth had won by not fighting. She spoke only once. We didn't mean to destroy your system. But now that we've seen it, we can't let it stand. That single phrase spread across networks faster than any attack. It was more than defiance. It was judgment, and the systems began to fracture. Zalari fleets turned on one another, not out of malice, but confusion. Soldiers began to question their purpose. Engineers sabotaged command cores. Autonomous drones shut down mid-flight. The virus had infected their systems directly. It had infected the assumptions those systems were built on. The rigid foundation of order, hierarchy, and compliance collapsed on itself. The carriers understood this wasn't victory. Not yet. The Zalari were ancient, resilient. Somewhere beyond the known stars, deeper structures waited. Ones not yet touched by the infection. But now, Earth knew how to reach them. Not with fleets or bombs, but with ideas sharp enough to pierce logic, with meaning strong enough to reshape identity. The bloom projected future paths, mapping out civilizations likely to resist and those ready to awaken. Earth would not conquer. It would infect with potential. It would challenge the stagnation of species who traded freedom for perfection. The virus was no longer a tool. It was a mirror, and not every species was ready to see what stared back. In distant star clusters, whispers of Earth spread like wildfire, not rumors of destruction, but transformation. Some called it a sickness, others salvation. Traders carried stories of humans who could speak to machines without touching them, of forests that whispered ancient secrets, of music that healed, of death that no longer ended life. The most dangerous thing about the virus was no longer its ability to kill. It was its ability to make others want more. The carriers never demanded loyalty. They offered understanding. They didn't ask for worship, only curiosity. They didn't enforce submission. They showed what it looked like to change. And that, above all else, terrified the powers that still held the galaxy, because they had built their empires on certainty, on static structures, on control, and humanity had just proven that chaos evolves. The virus that had once been a weapon was now something more, a message encoded in biology and thought alike. Change is coming, whether they wanted it or not. The final strike came not in the form of fleet, but in a message broadcast across every communication channel in the galaxy. It wasn't a military declaration. It wasn't an invasion fleet. It was a concept. The carriers had come to understand something that the Zalari, with all their cold logic, never could. Victory didn't always need a battlefield. The true weapon was the ability to make others question everything they knew, to make them see that their rigid structures, their mechanized perfection, were prisons, not pinnacles. On the edge of the Milky Way, the first of the Zalari colonies fell. Not to bombs, not to viruses, but to self-doubt. The broadcast was simple, yet devastating in its clarity. There's another way to live. Those who have been exposed to the Earthborn virus, those who have been infected not just with biology but with thought, began to tear down the very institutions that had made their lives comfortable. The virus did not compel them to violence. It made them ask questions. They began to dismantle their cities, their machines, their very understanding of themselves. Zalari citizens stopped going to work. They left their stations. The constructs they had built, the very ideas they had lived by for millennia, began to rot from within. The carriers understood that this was the beginning of a new phase, an awakening. It wasn't about conquering. It was about offering others a chance to evolve. The virus had given humanity the ability to question its own structure, to rebel against the limitations that had once seemed unchangeable. Now, it was a gift to the galaxy, a way to break free from centuries of stagnation, but not all would accept it. While some Zalari embraced the transformation, many others clung to their old ways, terrified of what might happen if they embraced the chaos of change. Those who resisted banded together, forming factions determined to hold onto their perfect order. They called it the Purity Directive. They saw humanity's rebellion as an abomination, something that threatened the very fabric of their existence. But they could not stop the shift. The virus had already spread too far. As the Zalari civil war began to spread through their systems, the carriers continued their mission. They did not force the infected onto other species. They didn't demand submission. They simply extended an invitation. Join us. Evolve with us. Understand what we know and see beyond the limitations of what you were. They offered the virus not as a weapon, but as a tool for growth. Earth, once the underdog in the grand cosmic scale, had become the catalyst for something that was changing the universe at its most fundamental level. The virus that had begun as a tool of annihilation had morphed into a bridge between the old, stagnant empires of the galaxy and the potential for something entirely new. A future where humanity's true strength wasn't in its weapons or its technology, but in its ability to embrace change, to adapt, and to break free from the confines of its past. Some species fought back, unwilling to bend to the virus's influence. They shut down their networks. They fortified their minds. They attempted to isolate themselves from infection. But as they did, they began to wither. The virus had already infected more than just biology. It had touched the very essence of thought itself. Ideas spread across the galaxy like wildfire, and there was no stopping them. The more they tried to isolate, the more they lost touch with the evolution that had already begun. And through it all, Earth stood as a symbol of what was possible. The carriers had no need to conquer. Their strength lay in their willingness to evolve. They had absorbed the virus, yes, but they had also absorbed the best of what humanity had to offer. Creativity, resilience, and a relentless drive to push beyond limits. Across the galaxy, countless species faced the same choice: cling to the old order or embrace the new, chaotic potential that the virus had unleashed. Some chose to fight, some chose to adapt, and some, too fearful of what lay beyond, chose to fade into obscurity. But the carriers didn't judge. They didn't conquer. They simply moved forward, one mind at a time, until the virus was no longer a disease. It was a shared experience, a collective growth that spanned the galaxy. Earth had become the seed of a new era, and the carriers, those once feared and misunderstood humans, had become the gardeners of that future. The Zalari knew they had lost. They could never return to their perfect order. Their efforts to suppress humanity's rebellion had only made it stronger. The virus had broken their minds in ways they could never undo, had exposed them to the one thing they had tried to avoid, the beauty of disorder. The very thing they had considered flaw had proven to be their greatest strength. In the final act of surrender, the Zalari leaders did what they had never done before. They asked for an audience with Earth's representatives. But they didn't come as conquerors. They came as learners. They came as those who had seen the limitations of their own ways and who were now ready to evolve. The meeting was not about peace. It was about evolution. And so, Earth's carrier sat with the Zalari, not as enemies, but as peers. The virus that had once been a weapon of destruction had become a symbol of cooperation. The galaxy, which had once seen Earth as a backwater planet ripe for the taking, now saw it as the beacon of a new future. One where change wasn't something to fear, but something to embrace. The Zalari would adapt. Other species would adapt. And together, they would shape a future where the virus wasn't a tool of war, but a symbol of the power of transformation. And in the end, Earth would stand not as a conqueror, but as the architect of a new universe. A universe where chaos wasn't the enemy, but the driving force behind a future that no one could predict it, because humanity, with all its flaws, had proven one undeniable truth. There is no such thing as perfection, only the relentless pursuit of what comes next.